The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is perhaps the most complex political issue of our time. Many have resorted to simply blaming one side or the other. But if we take the time to understand the history and correct our misconceptions, a potential path forward for the Palestinians begins to emerge. So let's start by trying to get the story straight and clear up 10 of the biggest misconceptions out there. Misconception number 1. Israel illegally stole land from the Palestinians. In 1947, the UN voted to give land to both the Jews and the Palestinians. The Jews accepted their partition and legally formed the State of Israel. The Palestinians rejected their partition and attacked. Even after losing the war, the Arabs still had most of the land from the UN ruling. Which leads us to...
Wait a minute. So the UN voted to give land? Give land? You mean Palestine? What was there before the UN decided to give anyone anything? What about the indigenous Arabs that were the majority over the Jewish immigrants? Would you agree if your neighbors decided to give most of your house to an armed stranger who wouldn't hesitate to massacre your family if you stood in his way? Would you?
Misconception number 2. The surrounding Arab nations actually want to create a Palestinian state. So after the war, the West Bank and Gaza were controlled by Jordan and Egypt for 19 years. During that span, those governments never established a Palestinian state. Instead, they kept the land for their own use.
Wait one more minute, I can't follow you. Didn't you say the Jews accepted the UN partition plan? So why is the map different now? That's roughly 22% of the total land of Palestine. What kind of state can you create with that? As if Israel's all for the creation of a Palestinian state. Throughout history, Israeli leaders fought against the very thought. Even today, if you check the Likud party's charter that embraces illegal settlements, it states that the government of Israel flatly rejects the establishment of a Palestinian Arab state west of the Jordan River. The Palestinians can run their lives freely in the framework of self-rule, but not as an independent and sovereign state.
Misconception number 3. The Arab nations want to solve the refugee crisis. Palestinians have settled in Arab nations throughout the Middle East. These nations could solve the crisis immediately by granting refugees equal rights, but instead, they refuse to let them vote, own land, or even study in public schools. Ironically, the only country to grant them full citizenship rights is Israel, which absorbed 156,000 Arabs after the 1948 war, and even today, Arabs hold seats in the Israeli government and Supreme Court.
Oh! So there are Arabs in the Israeli government. Let's see what they have to say.
מאז 64 שנים לא הוקם ולא אף יישוב ערבי אחד. אתה צודק. הוקמו מאות התנחלויות. כמו שאני מגיש הצעת חוק כל קדנציה והיא נופלת. כי הממשלה מתנגדת. הקמת עיר ערבית חדשה. למה אנחנו לא שווים? אין חבר כנסת שהמדינה לא הפקיעה ממנו, מאבא שלו, מאמא שלו, מההורים שלו, מאות דונמים של קרקעות. איך קמה המדינה הזאת אם לא על האדמות שלנו? זה נטל או זה לא נטל? בכפייה, בעל כורחנו, גזלתם את אדמותינו. אתם מדברים על נטל? המדינה הזאת הייתה נטל על הערבים, מאז שהיא קמה עד עכשיו. אז לפחות תשנו את המדיניות. תתייחסו אל האזרחים כאל שווים אחרי שגזלתם את כל האדמות שלהם. מה נשאר? 3% מהאדמות הפרטיות בחזקת ערבים, אחרי ש-85% היו בבעלות ערבים. תודה רבה.
Being a second-class citizen does not mean you have full rights in the state of Israel. The only way for you to have full rights in Israel is to be a Jew. If full rights were given to Arabs in Israel, there wouldn't be Jewish-only roads and settlements. And what about Tariq Abu Khdeir, a young Palestinian boy who was beaten only because he's an Arab?
Misconception number 4. UN efforts are helping to solve the refugee crisis. The UN did step in to provide assistance to the Palestinian refugees, but instead of using their existing agency that helps resettle refugee populations around the world, the UN created UNRWA, which labels every Palestinian as a refugee until a Palestinian state is formed within the borders of Israel. This makes it more difficult for Palestinians to thrive in their host countries and locks them into perpetual refugee status, passing it on to their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, swelling the refugee population from 500,000 in 1949 to nearly 5 million today. As conditions worsened, the international aid started to pour in, which, incidentally, is...
I see what you did there. Crying out against the UN for creating UNRWA does not make Israel an exemption from international law that requires it to allow the return of Palestinian refugees and pay reparations. You know, the same way West Germany was made to pay Israel. Funny how Israel plays that double standard. By the way, UNRWA was established based on UN Resolution 302, which was also agreed upon by Israel itself.
Misconception number 5. The solution is more money. Really? Western nations have given the Palestinians a ton of aid. Even taking inflation into account, they've been given 25 times more money per person than Europe was given to rebuild after World War II. Where's the stable economy? Where's the improved infrastructure? That money sure could have helped, but it was given to some leaders who had a different agenda.
Did you just say money? Israel's the last to say anything about money, since it receives about $3 billion annually from the USA alone. That's 3 times more money than the aid that the USA provided the educational sector in the entire world every year. Where does that money go? Why is there no stable economy? Well, I would say, how can any economy thrive under an occupation? Especially when pictures like this show us what an occupation can do to the infrastructure of a city.
Misconception number 6. Forming a state is the primary goal of top Palestinian leaders. All of this international aid did go to help ease one man's suffering, Yasser Arafat. After his death, accountants hired by Arafat's own family discovered secret investments worth more than $1 billion. That income stream would be threatened if a new state was formed, which gives leaders like Arafat, or Mahmoud Abbas for that matter, $1 billion+ reasons to never actually sign a peace treaty. Which leads us to...
Now, controversy aside, even if we assume Palestinian leaders and governments were corrupt, that is not an excuse to continue the occupation, which, by the way, feeds corruption as it cripples the function of any form of Palestinian governance, as well as the efficiency of Palestinian public institutes. And by the way, this is how Arafat lived his final days under Israeli siege in his headquarters in Ramallah.
Misconception number 7. Israel has a true peace partner. In the year 2000, desperate for a resolution, the Israelis elected Prime Minister Ehud Barak with a mandate to make peace with the Palestinians. Barak offered Yasser Arafat 94% of the land he demanded, except Jerusalem. Arafat flatly refused. President Clinton blamed the failure of the best chance at peace in 60 years squarely on Yasser Arafat. Which brings up perhaps the most common misconception of all.
Hold on. Do you think the USA would accept 94% of its lands without Washington, D.C.? Or maybe France will do it without Paris? Perhaps Germany without Berlin? Come on! Even if Israel gave Palestinians the whole 100% of their demands, Israel will still have 78% of historical Palestine. That leaves 22% for any viable Palestinian state. Don't you think that's enough?
Number 8. Israel just needs to give up land for peace. The last time Israel tried this was in 2005. They forced thousands of Jewish settlers out of Gaza, and in exchange, the Palestinian leaders promised peace. But when the Israelis moved out, the Palestinians voted Hamas in. Yep, they elected a terrorist organization who, since taking power, has fired more than 10,000 rockets into Israel. Surprised?
Sorry I'm interrupting so much, but please wait. Doesn't Israel still control all borders, airspace, and regional waters surrounding Gaza? That would mean that Gaza is still under Israeli occupation. And by the way, the elections that brought Hamas to power occurred both in Gaza as well as the occupied West Bank. And that was after 25 years of negotiations that brought nothing but more settlements and Israeli expansion in the West Bank. And if we want to talk about rockets, let's compare a Hamas rocket to an Israeli airstrike. But I'm sure numbers can tell a lot more when 2,000 Palestinians are killed by Israel in the last aggression, with only 3 Israeli settlers killed by rockets.
Then you've probably bought into misconception number 9. Most Palestinians want a lasting peace with Israel. Some Palestinians do, but they are a minority. For 60 years, Palestinian educational leaders have fed their children a steady diet of hate, idolizing suicide bombers and celebrating death right in the classroom. And finally,
give me a break. All human beings want peace, and Palestinians are no exception. They are human too. But the occupation is what feeds hatred. What can you expect from a child that lost his entire family in an Israeli airstrike? What can you expect from a Palestinian man who lost his livelihood from his land because of an Israeli settlement? All Palestinians want is to live in dignity. If you want to talk about an education that feeds hate, we just need to look at some good old-fashioned settler education on how they teach their children to love.
misconception number 10. Giving the Palestinians a state now is the only solution to their suffering. This has been the only approach tried for the last 60 years. But these are people we're talking about. And waiting until they have a state to give them equal rights has only made things worse. Currently, Israel is the only nation to grant full rights to the Palestinians within their borders. But by granting them equal rights in every nation where they live, we could immediately increase the quality of life for every Palestinian.
Okay, that's it. You crossed the line here. You once again mentioned that Israel is the only place Palestinians have equal rights in the region. Do we really need to go back there? Palestinians themselves are refusing full citizenship rights in countries other than their homeland. They want a home for themselves with the right to self-determination. That, and only that, is the way to end their suffering. Wouldn't you want your own home as well?